Hey, welcome back to Nick Paclocks. Today we're continuing the deep dive series. We'll be covering the 98 Pro on this episode. The 98 Pro was a aluminum body 7-pin padlock made by the Paclock company. The body is made from solid 6061 aircraft grade aluminum to provide high strength and weather resistance. Primarily the lock is sold as a lotto lock. It's very popular among pickers as a milestone lock for their blue belt in the LPU ranking system. Paclock is aware of the popularity of their lock among pickers, and the 98 Pro particularly. After releasing the Pro Series lock, which boasts over 2,000 different key changes or MAC acceptable bidding codes, Paclock came out with the 200K club for pickers that are able to open one of their 200,000 Pro Series locks, which is what the Paclock Pro falls under, which is denotable by the key having the 200K stamped into it. The Pro Series locks include the 98 Pro and the PL410 Pro padlock. Both locks contain the exact same 7-pin core and bidding possibilities. The difference between the two models is that the material used on the body will be different between the two of them, and whether the shackle is spring-loaded or not. The PL410 Pro has a thermoplastic body and a dead shackle with no spring to eject it out when the lock is open, very similar to the Master Lock 410 Lotto lock, where the 98 Pro has the aluminum body and a spring-loaded shackle. The locks are available in different colors, but blue tends to be the most popular among pickers as it matches the belt rank of the lock within the LPU system. The core of the lock is technically a dead core, though it may not be noticed while picking. That meaning that unlike the 1100, there's no spring on the actuator in the back of the lock. There really isn't an actuator. The tailpiece of the core plug acts as the actuator right here in that regard. The core of the lock, specifically the plug, like I said, doubles as the actuator. The tail of the plug is shaped, you can see here with the little divots, for the ball bearings to rest into when the lock is in the unlocked position, and then as it turns, forces them into the cutouts of the shackle to lock the lock when it's in the locked position. As mentioned in the 1100 video, the inclusion of the ball bearing locking mechanism improves the security of the lock by making it unable to be opened via shimming. Now, the actuator being part of the locked core and plug adds to the security of the lock by negating the ability to bypass the lock with a bypass tool, since there is no secondary mechanism like the actuator to act on or manipulate. The shackle placing upward force on the ball bearings causes the shackle to then apply force to the ball bearings and forcing the plug, giving it the feeling of there being a spring actuator, and causing people to not necessarily realize that it is a dead core. We can see here on this cutaway. So if I push the shackle down, those bearings can move somewhat or have a little more slack. Let's see. Whereas when they're pushed up, they're catching on the bottom lip of the shackle here, and they're not moving. So that spring tension on the shackle pushing up is pushing the ball bearings towards the middle of the lock, which is making it feel like there's some type of spring tension or pressure on this actuator, when in reality it's just a dead core. And then we can see that when the lock is unlocked, that turns. There we go. We'll turn the shackle coming up, already having pressure here on the ball bearing, pushes them forward to rest into the recesses on the tailpiece, which then allows the shackle to come out. look in there. If I can see. There we go. Now, the lock core and plug are drilled for 7 pins, and they are keyed with 7 pins. The pins, like the 1100, can be the key pins, like the 1100, can either be standard or serrated, depending on key length. The drivers of the lock come in 3 types, being serrated pins, spool pins, and an anti-bump pin. The anti-bump pin is located in the 7th pin stack in the back of the lock near the tailpiece. The spool drivers in the lock are standard spools, unlike the 1100 serrated spools. It's worth mentioning that while the 90A Pro contains standard spools, the 90A model does contain serrated spools. The serrated drivers what? Yeah, the serrated drivers are serrated. I don't really know what else to say about that. The pins are the same diameter as the 1100 and the Avis 7240, which increases the available options for you if you wanted to repin the lock or alter it to make it into a challenge lock. One of the hallmarks of the 90A Pro is also the crunchy or gravelly feeling of the pins when picking. Description can be hard to explain. It's best understood by picking the lock. I myself have heard many times that before picking the lock and didn't really grasp it or fully understand it until I began learning and picking the lock myself. In an attempt to explain it, though, I will say the pins, plug, and Bible feel like they have been roughed up or unpolished after milling, and then a pinch of sand or salt was added to the lock so that even without the inclusion of the anti-bump pin, kinetic force would not transfer well enough for the pins and would provide greater friction to hamper the use of fast key insertion. It's weird. It's crunchy, gravelly. Yeah. You can kind of see that when putting keys into the locks. Here's my, here, give me that. I don't know if you can hear it too well, but like the keys don't want to go in smoothly or easily. And that's kind of what the gravelly thing is. Yeah, you'll feel when you pick it. As mentioned earlier, the lock has a dead core, which means there's no spring tension on the actuator to act on the lock and turn the plug to a locked position after it's opened, which makes it key retaining because you're not going to be able to take that key out at all until the shackle is closed and the lock is fully locked. This prevents the key from being removed, like I said, until it's in the correct orientation, which works as a safety feature for the lotto locks when tagging out equipment. The feeling of spring tension, though, is from the core and the ball bearings acting on them with the sprung shackle, like we talked about earlier, which can make it feel like you need to put more tension on it than you really do. But like the 1100 and then dead cores in general, though the 1100 isn't a dead core, you may feel like you need to put more tension on it than needed, but light tension is all you really need. One of the ways you can combat that, though, or the feeling of heavy tension, is to employ what's known as the shackle grapple that was found by Picker Keybeard. This trick is done by depressing the shackle slightly. You can see the ball bearings roll back, which is going to allow the ball bearings to come back into the shackle recess, not apply pressure to the tailpiece actuator, and then require less force to then turn the plug. There we go. So, if I see that it takes a little bit of inertia to get that thing going. But if we depress the shackle, not fully, but somewhat, so that the ball bearing is hovering in the middle of the recess, the core just moves smoother and easier, more easily. Might be able to show it better with a not cutaway lock. This one. So if I go to turn it, it'll get to a point where it wants to stop, and that's where it's hitting the ball bearings and they're being pushed back into the shackle. But if we depress the lock, not fully, but just a little bit, you can see that it doesn't have that hang up or catch point anymore, which can help with picking a little bit. Now, the best practice when picking is to use a heavier tension to test the pin states and then lighten up on the tension to set them. So you're going to be varying your tension a whole lot more than you've done up to this point with picking the belt system. At least that was the case for me. Once a pin is set, heavier tension is then applied to find the next binding pin. The anti-bump pin, depending on when it's set, can increase the likelihood of dropping into a false set or the likelihood of dropping previously set pins. Get that fixed over. Is what it is there. Okay. The pin's also, this pin's also typically the stiffest pin because of the length of it. It's going to bind more easily and also be the longest one to set, really, or bind for the longest amount of time because of its length relative to the other drivers that are in the lock. And it's going to compress the spring a little bit more as well, just because there's less space for the spring to take up within the lock. Now, this lock's either loved or hated by pickers. Personally, I'm not a big fan of picking them. But with that said, we'll get one of these up in a vise, get it picked and gutted. Well, we're not going to gut it. We're just going to pick it because we already had one gutted right here. And the ball bearings back here, there's nothing holding them in place once the core is removed either. To remove the core, it is a 1/8 inch Allen key down the shackle. Unscrew that. You have your anti-drill plate, your nut. Those will fall out. Core falls out. Ball bearings fall out. If you can gut an 1100, it's not any increase in difficulty to gut the 98 Pro. But we'll get one of these in the lock. We'll get this cutaway in the lock. And we'll get that open and talk about picking that. All right. See you in a second. Okay, now that we have the 98 Pro in the vise, we'll get this picked and opened. Now, we are not using the shackle grapple method on this one. We're just going to pick it. I'm using a 40,000th top of keyway turner and a medium hook. So we'll go 1, click. Jiggle test doesn't feel set. That feels set now. And I'll go back to 2. All right. Might not be set. 3 feels all right. 4. Nothing really. 5. And go back to 1. I'll get another click on 1, 2. 1 fell. 2, 3. 4. 5. What's holding this up? Probably overset too. just start over on that. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. There we go. It's a very satisfying pop when that does happen. Lock that back up. All right. Now for the shackle grapple. There we go. I'll kind of depress the shackle against one of the supports there. We can get that better angle. There we go. Yeah, so now those ball bearings have been taken out of play to an extent. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 1. A little click there. 2, 3. There we go. You can see that because the ball bearing pressure has been taken off of the tailpiece, that it doesn't want to just fling open. So we were in an unlocked state. Also have this whole thing clamped in, so it's not going to pop open either. But that is the 90A Pro. Let's see if we get some of this stuff out of the way here. Stare at the evil bunny. But that has been the deep dive on the Paclock 90A Pro. Hopefully this was enjoyable and helpful. And think I've decided on the next deep dive that we're going to do, but I'll leave that one as a surprise for now. All right. Y'all have a good day.